Hello again, I am Blunty, and that, obviously, is Monster Hunter Wilds, running basically maxed out over on PC. But Wilds is a multi-platform game, isn't it? And there just so happens to be a brand new console coming from the one platform that this game does not yet exist on. So, many people have, naturally enough, been asking, will this game come to Nintendo Switch 2? And if it does, what in Gog's name will it even look like when this notoriously performance-piggy game is nerfed enough to live there? So yeah, people, that's it. Today we're breaking down the possibilities, the performance targets, the install size, everything around what that could mean for hunting on the go, Wilds style, on the Switch 2. So let's dive in now. Before you all start running away with yourselves here, or worse, start spreading misinformation around, no, let's be clear, no, capital N, capital O, Monster Hunter Wilds has not, at least at the time of recording, been confirmed to be coming to Switch 2. There is not even a whisper of a hint of a rumor of anything credible and sourced that suggests it. But you are listening to the voice of the man who 100% completely and correctly, perfectly predicted the arrival of Cyberpunk 2077 as a Switch 2 flagship launch title game, and it too had nothing credible from rumors or supposed sources or leaks or anything suggesting that it would be. Not even a whisper of a leak, but I solved it out using extrapolation from nearby facts and ground up logic, and I friggin' nailed it. Told you I wasn't going to stop being smug about that anytime soon. So, I think I've earned a little extra rope to play with, right? What could possibly go wrong? Now, of course, given Monster Hunter Wilds' explosive success since its launch, barely more than a month ago, I'll remind you, smashing sales records for Capcom along the way, and given Capcom's historically close relationship with Nintendo, a lot of people are quite naturally asking, even hoping, if Wilds would make an appearance on the Switch 2. And when I say Nintendo and Capcom work closely, did you ever hear the story about how it was Capcom's advice to Nintendo that might have very well saved the Switch itself from becoming a complete failure? Because during development of the original Switch, Capcom insisted that Nintendo should upgrade their early development prototypes to use 4 gigabytes of RAM instead of the somewhat less they were working with to that point. Capcom told them that unless the new hardware had 4 gigabytes, it would make it impossible for them to publish anything made with their in-house game development engine, RE Engine, to it. RE Engine, of course, is what runs Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak, another record-breaking success for Capcom and Nintendo and the Switch, and the best-selling third-party published title on the Nintendo Switch across its entire lifespan. Every other title that sold better was first-party Nintendo stuff. And RE Engine is also what runs Monster Hunter Wilds. And one has to wonder if Capcom had any more game-changing advice for Nintendo during this Switch 2's development. Now then, to get to Wilds on Switch 2, what it would look like, what it would feel like, what it would perform like, I need to walk you through what we're using as a framework for performance expectations. So let's go back to Cyberpunk 2077. It's coming to the Switch 2, and many people, except yours truly and anyone who watched my video about it, was shocked, I say, that Night City was arriving on the Switch 2. Many were calling it one of those quote-unquote impossible ports that the OG Switch managed on occasion, gobsmacked by the possibility of it all, astonished by its very existence and the boldness of CDPR. Well, that's going to serve as our benchmark of sorts today, because it too is a visually dense, performance-intensive game, much like Wilds is. And in the days since the announcement, we've heard a few more vital clues about its own performance targets on the Switch 2, and we can use that information to extrapolate how, and indeed if, Wilds would run on the Switch 2. So, we now know from various sources that Cyberpunk 2077 runs on the Switch 2 targeting 40 FPS in a performance mode, which, as I've spoken about at length in my other videos where I've tested the game on lower-end hardware like the ROG Ally handheld gaming PC, is what I would consider the sweet spot between the game feeling smooth and responsive and any compromises you might have to make to the graphics settings and resolution. Indeed, the Steam Deck players and what they call their golden settings for Cyberpunk on that even less powerful device, their perfect settings, their ideal settings, also targets 40 FPS. And one of the reasons behind that is 40 FPS also happens to be where variable refresh rate comes into play for a very clean and tear-free feed to a VRR-capable screen like the Steam Deck has, like the ROG Ally has, and indeed the Nintendo Switch 2 has. But according to one source I've found so far, and only one source by the way, although they do claim to have heard this directly from a CDPR representative when they asked them directly about this at a Switch 2 hands-on event in New York City, there's also a quality mode that supposedly targets 25 to 30 FPS. And yeah, here's how I reacted to that concept while I was live streaming a reaction to GVG's video, which is where I heard this from.
And that it will have a quality mode targeting 25 to 30 FPS, which, you know, I don't know where that's going to land. I don't know what the build we played looked at, but...
25 to 30 in quality mode. That's not going to be very playable. Might be good for screenshots and photo mode, but no. Having attempted to play this game, 30 FPS, when I was first doing my testing on the ROG Ally, no. You need to be nailed to 30 at the absolute minimum. But like I said, every time I test it on low power stuff, I target 40 as my floor. Anything below 40 just doesn't feel right. Anything above 40 tends to feel pretty damn good for this particular game. Depending on your playstyle, there are certain playstyles where you need a little bit more, but for mostly, if you can get to 40, it plays really nicely. But no, not 25 to 30 target, no. That might be an issue. I wonder what the visual difference is between the two modes though. That's going to be the thing to test. So yeah, needless to say, 40 FPS will be the target we're looking for in our testing today. So, the next key part of the formula here is the resolution at which it needs to meet that target. And while there's no official words yet, the Digital Foundry guys who specialize in this kind of forensic examination of video games did some evaluation based on what little direct capture gameplay we have seen so far, which is not much. But according to their work and published statements in video and on the Eurogamer blog, while docked in quality mode, that's the 30 FPS one, it was running at a dynamic resolution between 720 and 1080p. So, if the quality mode can reach 30 FPS and ramp up to 1080, let's say the extra 10 FPS we look for in performance mode comes at the cost of running at 720p upscaled to a 1080p output, very likely using DLSS upscaling. Which, while Nintendo themselves have not said so, they've never even uttered the acronym DLSS, we do know directly from a blog post from Nvidia themselves that the Switch 2 can and will be capable of using DLSS. So now we have resolution and frame rate targets. The other graphic settings are a lot harder to estimate because we have very little gameplay to go on, and most of what we do have is from cutscenes, not from free gameplay. But there is a couple of key scenes that we do have in the new trailer and a little bit of driving, so let's see what we can do. Using the ROG Ally itself as a benchmarking tool because it can run both Cyberpunk and Monster Hunter Wilds at playable levels. So on the ROG Ally in the 18-watt power mode, which is considered to be the best balance for the system, here's what the game looks like when I target 40 FPS at 720p. This is a mix of low and medium settings, mostly medium. And as you can see from this, one of two key gameplay-specific scenes, the location, the frequently visited during the main quest line, Afterlife Bar. My settings here seem like a pretty close match for what we've seen in the Switch 2 trailer, right? It seems maybe obvious that the Switch 2 version is probably rendering internally below 720p. It is noticeably softer, but it is also a lot cleaner of aliasing, so I'm thinking that's maybe 720p using DLSS to pop up to 1080p, which would mean DLSS in quality mode. But I think it's probably more likely balanced or performance mode DLSS for a 626p or even a 540p internal render upscale to 1080p after all. It is a tricky thing to match with my quick and dirty testing method here and the very limited footage that we have. It's clear there's a very bespoke crop of graphical settings they're using for Switch 2, but it is near enough for our purposes. So here's another iconic location we can match from the trailer, the Burger Bar. Again, a couple of key moments from the main quest happen here. And again, my settings seem a reasonably decent match for the settings the Switch 2 version appears to use, but also, the Switch version is a little gentler, isn't it? Smoother. Not quite softer, really. Like, it's not blurry, And it does seem to have some more atmospherics going on in the depth there. But the waitress's face and her hair and her dress and whatnot are still nice and clean looking. Perhaps even more pleasant than my 720p RAW, actually. Aesthetically, I think the Switch 2 version looks nicer, actually. It's less crunchy, more organic. Now, at this point, it's really important to note that the stuff in the trailer that we have, and whatever we've seen from the hands-on demos, which was all cameras pointed at TV screens anyway, because no one was allowed to do any direct-to-video capture, everything we've seen so far is work-in-progress builds, not the final game. But it's safe to say the actual release build will indeed be more refined. But also, if they're showing this off, it's still probably at least a decent match for what we should expect. So, all of that covered, it's also worth reiterating that what you've seen here of my own gameplay, again, is a mix of medium and low settings. It was all native 720p, no upscaling, no frame gen, nothing, just raw, pure 720p. And as you've been seeing, that 40 FPS target was pretty closely matched. So at this point, we can use this 18-watt power mode and a 40 FPS target and 720p native resolution as a test bed benchmark to see how Wilds does under these same conditions. Don't touch that flaming bubble. And I'll say this much up front here. The keen-eyed among you who know what you're looking for might very well have already picked up on something rather important here in this footage. The gameplay you're seeing, of course, is with the very latest patch, as you can see by the fact I'm running these tests by fighting Mitsuzuni, a monster literally just added to the game a few days ago. Now then, did you pick up on the problem here? Did you see it? Did you notice it? I'll give you a hint. Look at the motion of the UI elements like the monster icon. Yeah, see how it's so much more juddery? You know what that is? You know what that's a giveaway sign of? That is a sign that we're running with frame generation, which of course means that the frame rate counter up there, that's kind of fake. The real frame rate, what the game feels like to actually play right now, is half that. And that is really borderline playable. I mean, I'm doing okay here, but it's not super nice to play, I gotta tell you. Certainly not as nice as if that frame rate was native. As I went over extensively in a couple of other videos about Wilds, both pre and post launch, you really should not be using frame gen unless you're already at or near 60 FPS, because it is not designed or intended to take 30 FPS to 60 FPS and whatnot and still feel good. AMD and Nvidia both strongly advise against that use very explicitly. But the reason I bring all that up is, even though Nvidia have a new blog post detailing the Switch 2's GPU hardware, including their special tensor cores, which enable optimization of machine learning-driven features like deep learning supersampling, known to you and me as DLSS, as we were talking about before, and they specifically detail its use on the Switch 2 in boosting apparent resolution through upscaling, and they even mention that the Switch 2 can do ray tracing, by the way, which Nintendo themselves haven't mentioned yet, but the hardware can do it. But if we're going to see it in games, it's probably going to be in quite a limited fashion. My ROG Ally can do ray tracing too, but it only has like 12 cores that do that. But it can do it. I've even done it in Cyberpunk before. But what Nvidia did not mention at all, even once, in that blog post is frame gen. So either frame gen is not part of how they've set up the hardware and software stack for the Switch 2, or Nintendo themselves have kind of outlawed its use on Switch 2. And if they have, hooray for Nintendo, because we've seen a growing number of devs use FrameGen to cheat their on-paper performance numbers and advertise frame rates. Looking at you, Capcom. So let's assume FrameGen is not available to use on Switch 2. We'll need to lower the settings even more and lower our frame rate target to a capped 30 FPS, and we'll have to carve out some more performance headroom by going way more aggressive with the upscaling. And all of that gets us, well, nothing, really. It looks way worse, but the frame rate is pretty much where it was already. So the settings we're messing with weren't really the bottleneck here. This is just smashing against the walls of the limits of the hardware, really. And without FrameGen smoothing it out visually, it's even less playable now than it was. Bloody horrible. In fact, I got eye strain while recording this, no lie. I had to take a break for like half an hour and just stare at a window for a bit. But all of this was at the 18-watt power mode. That's where we tested Cyberpunk at, so that's where I tested here. And I already knew this wasn't going to be good. I've extensively tested Wilds on the ROG Ally already. I've got videos about it and whatnot. And I already know that we really need to go to the 30-watt power mode to get a properly playable experience with this game on that device. And the game can be properly playable on this hardware, which on paper is weaker than what the Switch 2's GPU should be capable of. And we don't have the hard numbers, but some rough calculations based on what we do know about the battery capacity and the stated expected battery life. It is likely a 10-watt power profile on the Switch 2. Now, that is also in the context of the NVIDIA ARM-based architecture, which is notably more power efficient than the AMD architecture in the ROG Ally. And we can use Cyberpunk to show that fact. The rough match I got before with the ROG Ally to the Switch 2, with Cyberpunk, well, we needed the Ally to be in an 18-watt power profile to do that. That is fully 80% higher power draw than what we're anticipating the Switch 2 will do. But it also has the Windows overhead and whatnot, so it's really hard to pop apples beside apples on that one. Still worth keeping in mind, though. So yes, I know full well, I'm sure people have left comments already, but I know full well how very loose this methodology is. Different games, different game engines, completely different hardware architecture and operating systems and all of that. But in a very broadly ballpark kind of way, it can give us a hint as to what could work and what might be possible. And don't neglect to consider just how important Monster Hunter is as a property to Capcom. It is their biggest IP by far, and their best-selling series by an extremely large margin. Monster Hunter Rise was developed as a Nintendo exclusive for the original Switch, but it did so well they ported it to PC after a single year and PlayStation and Xbox after that. I have no doubt that if it is possible, if it is practical, and with some very careful and dedicated optimization for the Switch 2's hardware, Capcom could indeed port the game to Switch 2. I bet you they want the game there, so they could, sell more. The when would be a bit of a question, though. The devs have had their hands full with the launch issues with the two console versions and the PC versions out already. And of course, the title updates we just got. It's not hard to imagine that if there is work going on the Switch 2 release, it is shifted to the back burner for a little bit. And maybe we'll see it like we saw the console versions of Rise, that being in time for the Master Rank expansion. And if that's the case, we will be waiting at least a year. But to truly make this a wishlist game, and considering the asynchronous launch with the other versions, you'd really want cross-save progression to happen at that point. Pairing portable mode on the Switch 2 with the 4K maxed out game I have on my gaming PC would be sweet, to be able to seamlessly slide between those two and not skip a beat. The game already has cross-play with the players from all platforms sharing the same servers. The missing cross-save is a frustration already for some, if not many, in the community, and it will be very much so for any Switch version that launches, again, probably a year later, if at all. And of course, you'd need consistent performance in the lower power handheld mode as well. We've been focusing on docked mode performance here with the loose benchmarking, but a cut to resolution to 540p upscale could probably get near enough on fixing that. Don't know if that'd be an acceptable situation for Capcom though, and their flagship game. Unlike with Rise, which had very stylized and bright art styles, Wilds, more grounded and gritty and dark style, does not lend itself well to remaining good looking when using low internal render resolutions. In fact, it looks pretty garbage pretty quickly when you try and do that. Still fun, but unpleasant to look at. As far as the size of the game goes, Monster Hunter Wilds is a 52.8GB install on the PlayStation 5, for example, which, easy job. The maximum cart size for Switch 2, right now at least, is 64GB, so that shouldn't be a problem. So Monster Hunter Wilds on the Nintendo Switch 2 might happen, but frankly, I would not put much money on it if I was a betting man. Call it possible, but not probable. But what I would, however, very much expect is Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak to get a Switch 2 Edition patch. That would be reasonably light work for Capcom. Just remove the resolution scaling limits, remove the frame rate cap, or simply adjust it to 60 FPS cap at least, and apply the higher resolution textures they already have, because they made them for the Xbox, PlayStation, and PC versions of the game. And that's all you'd really need to do at a basic level to significantly improve the look and feel and gameplay of Rise for the Switch 2 edition. And that game is superb feeling at 60 FPS. We already know that from the PC version and other consoles, of course. And there's still a large player base for that game. I went back to record some footage recently on the Switch, and the multiplayer matchmaking is still plentiful and fast, so it probably would be worth Capcom's while. Plus, you might even sell still more copies of that game and its expansion to people who didn't play Rise and Sunbreak the first time around, and perhaps only just recently found love for the series through Wilds itself, which does seem to be bringing even more new players on than World did before it 8 years ago. So there seems to be value there to me, and I'm betting Capcom too. So yeah, I think that situation is far more likely for Monster Hunter on Switch 2, but still, a man can hope for Wilds, can't he? Anyway, hope you enjoyed a little sky gazing and thought experimenting here. Don't take it too seriously, of course, but it really would be interesting, I think. In any case, I want to know, would you play Wilds on the Switch 2, even with a pretty severe graphical downgrade, especially if it came with cross-save? So you could switch between, handheld mode and your other, real game on your big boy console or your PC. Drop a comment below, hit that like button if you're theoretically hyped, and don't forget to subscribe, please. Hit the bell, do the things, because YouTube is a merciless monster with how often it's been suppressing my videos in their hideous robot mind algorithm recently. Very frustrating indeed. Thanks for watching. I am Bloody. Thank you as always to the patrons, and I will catch you next time.
Right in the head!